Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Gyan Bhakti channel from Swami Nikhilananda. My humble prostrations to the all-pervading Brahman, to my worshipful Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, to Ram Parivar and all sages and saints, and to each of you divine soul watching today's satsang. We are currently studying the Holy Scripture, Mysticism of Ramayana. Commentary is by my Guruji, Swami Jyotirmayanandaji Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So let's get started on today's satsang. Today we will be discussing the mystic story of the marriage of Lord Shiva and Uma. So once upon a time in Treta Yuga, Lord Shiva was coursing through the skies in a heavenly chariot with his consort Sati. As they looked down towards the earth, they saw Rama and his brother Lakshmana roaming through the forest, crying out for the kidnapped Sita. Overjoyed at the vision of Rama, Shiva called out, Jai Satchidananda, adorations to Brahman, and he said that in great reverence. Hearing her husband call out in this way, Sati was amazed, and she said, O Lord, who is this mortal person that you have saluted with such adoration? Shiva replied, He is Rama, an incarnation of Brahman the Absolute. But that is impossible, replied Sati. How can a human being who is grieving so piteously over separation from his beloved possibly be Brahman, the immutable self? Seeing that Sati was doubting his omniscience, Shiva was distressed. However, he did not try to convince her of the fact that Rama was merely acting the part of a grieving human being while remaining internally ever untouched by the drama. Instead, Shiva suggested that she descend to the earth plane and test Rama, proving to herself whether or not he was indeed Brahman, the Absolute in human form. Sati accepted Shiva's suggestion and descended to earth with a plan to trick Rama and prove his mortality. With this in mind, she assumed a perfect likeness of the form of Sita and stood a distance down the forest path where the grieving brothers could see her. She expected that Rama, seeing his beloved, would completely lose his mental balance and race to her side with great joy. However, much to Sati's surprise, things happened in quite a different way. Seeing the goddess from a distance, Lakshmana immediately recognized Sati and silently wondered what divine purpose was behind her strange behavior. Then Rama saw Sati in disguise and inwardly smiled at the power of his own Maya or cosmic illusion. However, pretending that nothing was wrong, they approached Sati with folded hands and said, O goddess, where is Shiva? So they didn't even mention that she looked like Sita and she had taken the role of Sita, assumed that form. Why are you roaming alone in this forest? You who could never be separated from Shiva for even a moment. So they made that comment to Sati and they treated her as Sati rather than as Sita, whereas she was trying to trick Rama to show that he was a mortal being. Hearing these tender but profound words of Rama, Sati felt terribly ashamed of herself because first she did not listen to her husband, didn't believe him, tested him, and then he said go test Rama, and she then agreed and came down and really put Rama to the test. So she realized that she had made a terrible mistake in turning away from Shiva and in doubting the divine perfection of Rama. With her heart consumed by agony, she thought, what will happen to me now? How can I possibly face Shiva? So she was embarrassed to go back, needless to say. Seeing that Sati was repentant, Rama wanted to give her some parting spiritual gift. So by the power of his Maya, Rama induced in the mind of Sati a staggering vision Immediately in her mind there unfolded countless universes within universes, worlds within worlds, and in every world Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana were being adored by numerous gods, including Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu, as well as by their consorts. In each of these different world systems, the gods took on slightly different forms with different characteristics, but Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita were of the same form, unalterable and unchanging everywhere. So, this was the grace of Rama on Sati. This is how God is, full of compassion and kindness. Even the people who come to test Him, He gives them some gifts, some compassionate blessings. This vision created great awe in Sati's mind, and she lost her body consciousness. When she came back to normal and opened her eyes, she saw the familiar scene of Rama looking for Sita and expressing his grief like a normal human being. So she had just witnessed what reality looked like and yet what the show looked like. Now, however, Sati was more deeply aware of Rama's glory, so from a distance she bowed her head to Rama and then turned her steps towards the place where Shiva was awaiting her return. So these events, which portray Sati's doubt about Rama, her ensuing test of his transcendental nature, and her eventual brief vision of the divine majesty, have important mystic implications for an aspirant. Sati's view that Rama could not possibly appear so human and still be the transcendental Brahman is symbolic of the tendency of many spiritual aspirants to feel that God exists somewhere far away in the heavens, and it is only with great difficulty that one can feel His presence. How can that Brahman who is all pervading, unborn, beyond the reach of the senses and desireless, even be known or touched by my own consciousness? So we create that big dramatic picture, just like Sati could not recognize Rama. However, according to yogic insight, God in the form of Sagun Brahman, which is Brahman with attributes, in the form of an avatara incarnation such as Rama, can be befriended by a human being. One can sport with God, converse with God, walk with God, feel the presence of God in one's very own heart. And all this is possible with the development of divine love and intuitive understanding. Shiva represents the enlightened soul, ever devoted to the Absolute. Thus, Shiva constantly in meditation thinking about Rama. Sati represents the unenlightened intellect in a human being that has turned away from Shiva by developing doubts and delusion. That is the cause of our destruction, where we try to be too intelligent, we argue everything, we try to use logic in all these things. Such an intellect doubts the presence of the divine self. It doubts that God is behind the world and yet unaffected by the world. In its delusion, such an intellect adopts a deceptive method to test Rama and then later tries to deceive Shiva as well. Instead of listening to Shiva, which is the voice of the higher self, the intellect becomes externalized, turns towards the objects of the world, enters into the forest of the world process, despite the fact that the one who could resolve all problems is right there within one's heart. An unenlightened intellect leads the soul to continue wandering from birth to birth, looking for the solution to its problems in the world of time and space, in the shadows of the world process. In so doing, the soul that has turned away from the inner self encounters misery, pain, grief, and frustration. So we will continue this journey tomorrow. And I hope you're enjoying this wonderful holy scripture, mysticism of Ramayana. And we hope and pray that this lights the diya, the candle of devotion, the spark in your heart, where you resolve to spiritualize your daily life and enjoy the nectar of satsanga. This is Swami Nikhilananda. Om Tat Sat.